going to talk about relations, some in this unit, but throughout this course, and indeed throughout much of math, what we're really interested in is functions. I mentioned before that some mathematicians think that the set is the most fundamental notion in mathematics. There are other mathematicians that think that the function is the most fundamental notion. What is a function then? We say a relation is a function when each element of the domain appears in only one pair. So each element of the domain appears with only one element of the range. We can say each element of the domain only appears once, or each x is related to at most one y. We'll talk about why this kind of relation is special in just a moment. But first, let's just take a minute and see if we can recognize one of these. Here we have four relations, R, S, T, and Q, and we want to decide whether or not they're functions. And for that, we're going to look just at the elements of the domain. If each element of the domain appears in only one pair, then that's a function. And here we see -9 appears only here, 1 appears only here, 2 appears only here, 5 only appears here. So this first relation R, this is a function because each element of the domain only appears once. Next, let's look at this relation S. And again, to determine whether it's a function, we're just going to look at the domain elements. And here we see that -2 appears twice. -2 appears with -7 and also with +7. Since an element of the domain appears twice, this is not a function. Our evidence that this is not a function is that we have the pairs -2, -7, and -2, +7, which have the same x value, namely -2. Okay, next relation. We have -8, -3, -3, and 5. Oh, here we see that -3 appears in two different pairs as the element of the domain. So again, that's going to tell us that this is not a function. And our evidence that this is not a function is that we have those two pairs, -3, -2, -3, 5. They both have the same x value, x equals -3. Last one, let's look at this relation Q. We have in the domain -8, -3, 6, and 8. Okay, those are all different numbers. And so we see that this is a function because each element of the domain only appears once. Now notice that when we were doing that, we only looked at the first entries. We only looked at the elements of the domain. We only looked at the x values. That's all we need to look at to determine whether or not we have a function, right? So here we had -9 appear in both the domain and the range. We don't care about that. Here we had 9 appear twice in the range. We don't care about that. All we care about in determining whether or not we have a function is whether or not each element of the domain appears in only one pair.